Welcome to Krista Community, where we communicate Christ for community in America, Africa, Asia, and beyond. As missionaries for Christ, we serve the body of Christ through educating, evangelizing, and encouraging Christ-like discipleship as believers collectively make disciples of all nations. Jesus said in John 14:6, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Join us for today's teaching as we teach the way, the truth, and the life that can empower your faith, hope, and most of all, your love for Christ and neighbor.
All right, Ecclesiastes chapter 1. I've been sitting on the edge waiting to be able to preach this message. This is a great text this morning. But you're going to have to kind of buckle your seatbelt because we're going to fly through a lot of material. This is rich. It's filled with some wonderful things. All right, Ecclesiastes, we've studied so far down to verse 11. So let's begin in verse 12 and we'll go all the way through the second chapter. All right, are you ready for this? Let's go. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom, all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I've acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I perceived that this is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of men to do under heaven during the days of their life. I made great works. I built houses, planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted them in all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the children of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. For my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil that I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and striving after wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. And then I saw that there is much more gain in wisdom than in folly. And there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has the eyes in his head, and the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. For all is vanity and a striving after the wind. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled, and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. There is nothing better for a person than he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. This is God's word. It's his inerrant word, and it's an important word for us to hear this morning. One of the things of growing frustration in life, growing old in particular, is constantly not being able to find things. So I wonder how many of you know this sound. Do you know that sound? That's a sound that happens quite often at our house. It's somewhat a familiar sound. We cannot find our phone. I have mine here. And so Apple puts into the mechanics of a phone an ability to search for what we've lost. And one of us, perhaps once a day maybe, looking for our phone. That's what we hear. Perhaps the biggest reality of the fall and all of its devastating consequences is the loss of life as God ordered and designed it to be. We've lost it. But people search for it diligently. They look long and hard for it. In the introduction to his book, Solomon outlined for us the result of the curse of God in his own world. His propositional statement is very familiar to all of us. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. We learned that the vanity word here literally means vapor. It's the word chabel, smoke or mist. And what it's talking about here is you can't grab life. You can't control it. And you can't leverage it to gain some sort of control over life. And for some of us, it really is a frustration. Some of you, it makes you really angry. Our labor and our toil do not raise us to such a level that we gain then the right to control and manipulate people around us, manipulate our world, just because we work hard in life. This idea of vapor describes all of our activities, our pursuits, our entertainment, our pleasure, our material possessions, our wealth, our degrees and knowledge, or anything we do in our lives that we think that we are really contributing to. Ultimately, it is not as big a deal as we think it is. This is what Solomon's trying to get us to understand. So, we saw last week that he made some very moving conclusions. Nothing really changes. Look at the generations before and the generations now. They still deal with the same thing week after week after week. Sin, disease, war, relational struggles, and ultimately then they die. See the sun, see the wind. They do the same thing day after day. We also saw that nothing really satisfies. We saw the streams going into the waters, into the oceans, and the oceans are never filled. We saw that our senses were never completely satisfied. What we look at, what we hear, just we can't quite get enough. And then we saw that really nothing is ever new. And even when we think we have finally something new, it really isn't. It's the same thing, just dressed in a different t-shirt. And this is frustrating to us. And finally, there's really no lasting legacy, no matter how hard we try. The people before you have died and are forgotten. You will die and you will be forgotten. And people coming after you will see the same thing happen to them. You see, the reality is we're not entitled to life. We forfeited our right to have control of anything in life when we decided that God really wasn't God. And we've substituted our own will to be God, to be the rulers of our lives. And Genesis 3 tells us what happened on that day, a very tragic story of our attempt to be God. And nothing has been the same since. Ever since that day, there has been this inner turmoil in the heart of man. We were designed, or we were wired for the full, rich glory of God to be in us and through us and all around us. Sin caused this great division from God that sent Adam and Eve out of the garden. And ever since that fateful day, we have not been able to fill that void of God's glory that has left us. And so we're left with this inner dissatisfaction with every aspect of life. We fall short of God's glory. And so we daily, hour by hour, are like Solomon here, trying to prove to God and to ourselves and to others around us that we made the right choice in pursuing our own glory. And we hate it when people don't tie into our glory. They offend us. They stir up anger within us. Today in our text, Solomon simply sets out to take us on a journey. It's a journey that he made in pursuit of satisfaction and self-glory. I mean, he went after it. We'll see some very familiar sights on this journey because for the most part, his journey is our journey. His argument for this journey will come from experience, a very bitter experience, I might add. And it's in this journey that we will learn this true point. Life in God's world is a gift. It's not gain. It's a gift. And he works hard to unpack this message by showing us how he pursued gain in hopes of getting some sort of leverage to control life to his own end. And his conclusion is ultimately surprising. You'll be surprised at where this ends today. The gift of life from God doesn't change the vapor-like emptiness in this world. But it makes the vapor we do face enjoyable. There's great tension here, and I want you to see it. We'll visit wisdom. We'll visit this place called pleasure. We'll visit this place called possessions. And these are all places that we all visit in life. And we often use them to insulate ourselves from reality. And then we will learn the one thing in life that changes everything. It alters everything. All right, so let's look. Let's go first place. Let's stop at this place called wisdom. We see this in chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. It's the first stop on his tour. He says, I'm going to go on this visit. Wisdom is this great gift that God gave to him as a very young king. We read about it in 1 Kings 3, chapter 3 and chapter 4. And this passage in 1 Kings tells us that there was no man ever as wise as Solomon. So it's no surprise then that it is our first stop. That's the first place that he goes. He goes where he knows he will find help to maneuver through this life that he says is under the sun. It's here on earth. It's something that we all deal with.
He studies hard and he throws himself to gain wisdom and knowledge in order to find gain, in order to find leverage, in order to find some sort of satisfaction to that inner gnawing that tore him up on the inside. And you see this. Look at verse 12 with me. Notice what he says here. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done. So this was intentional. He goes after it all. And he learns from the best. He understands that he doesn't know everything, and so he applies his heart. He learns to study. He learns to seek. He learns to search for the end of wisdom. So he studies the opposites of sanity and wisdom, madness and folly. And he searches them to see what light they would shed on his soul. And in verse 13, he concludes, it's an unhappy business. It automatically wasn't what he thought it would be. As he began to look at wisdom and how it played out, it brought him into some very difficult scenarios. And he tries to find this satisfaction by pursuing wisdom and knowledge. But notice, it is what God has given to the sons of Adam. That's how it is in verse 13. Do you see that? He says this, it's an unhappy business that God has given literally to the sons of Adam. In other words, to all men from Adam. Notice the lengths that he will go to diligently search this out. He felt like he had seen everything under the sun. Man, he looked at everything. Any experience he could find. He had the wealth. He could purchase things. He could go after it. He had all kinds of possessions that allowed him to search this out. He applied his heart, and he did so with discipline. He did so with diligence to search this out until he felt like he had seen everything under the sun. That's an amazing statement. Have you seen everything under the sun? Solomon felt like he did. It was a thorough effort, is his point. Then notice three stunning conclusions that he comes to starting in verse 15. Look at verse 15 with me. What is crooked cannot be made straight. This is a little saying, probably some poem that is something that everyone would have been familiar with. And the idea here is that not everything is fixable. What is crooked can't be made straight. No matter how much he studied, no matter how much he sought to grab hold of answers, there were still things that couldn't be figured out. You ever felt like that in life? I should be able to figure this out. This shouldn't keep happening to me. Why is this continuing to happen to me? Things don't always make sense. There weren't always satisfying answers to his questions. And not everything had an answer that would solve things for him. And this was very unsettling to him. We think if we get wisdom, it will suffice. It will give us all that we need. It will fill that void. It will fix things, right? No. Some things are just crooked. They won't be made straight. They'll never get straightened out this side of eternity. Then he goes on to say, not everything is complete. What is lacking cannot be numbered. You know this. There's something always missing, isn't there? You like something, but it's just something's missing here. There's always a void. There's always a glitch, an anomaly, a hitch, a hiccup, whatever you want to call it. There's always a malfunction in the reasoning or the philosophy or the truth taught. Something always goes wrong. If I don't have the pieces, I can't figure it out. And I don't have all the pieces. Ever tried a Lego set? Or you ever put something together from IKEA? And you come down to the end and you have one thing sitting there and you're going like, ow. Ugh. Or you come to the end and you can't find that one thing. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. One piece is missing. You've done all the work of putting it together, but that piece is missing. And when you look at that jigsaw puzzle, what does your eye drawn to, that spot that piece is missing. It's frustrating, isn't it? You know this to be true. Things haven't gone the way you thought they would be, and it's so frustrating to you that what is lacking cannot be counted. Thirdly, even wisdom has its limits. The more the preacher understood life under the sun, the greater his despair. And you can see this kind of growing. You'll see this as we go through the entire book. There's this growing. He said in verse 16, I've acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were in Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. If he'd have stopped right there, we'd have thought, oh, great. But instead, he doesn't. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also but a striving after the wind. No, Solomon, it's wisdom you're dealing with. Dude, you have it. Figure it out. Get it right. And what he actually says here is the more he learned, the more he realized that he didn't know things. I have to be honest with you, I've been studying a lot, going through this doctorate program, and I'm so glad that you guys have allowed me to do this. But one of the things that it has done to my soul is there's just this mound of knowledge out there that I just don't know. And they kind of chuckle when you say that, like, yeah, that's kind of what it does. The more you get in, the more you read, the more you realize you don't. There's a lot that you just don't know. But that's not how we normally think, is it? We normally think by the time I get to age 62, I need to have a good knowledge about stuff. And some of you are in your 70s and your 80s, and you think, no, I know a lot. And then God brings something into your heart, into your life, and you realize, I don't know anything. You see, learning often pits what you know against what someone else knows, and it can bring a lot of despair, especially if they're the teacher. I just talked with my advisor, and he's just like throwing out these things left and right. I'm going like, whoa, I don't know what you're saying. And I got to do, and even I don't know what you're saying, I got to do that. But verse 17 gives us a glimpse of how the study panned out. He says it's a striving after the wind. This is something you'll see many, many times. The word here for striving is the word herd. Not H-E-A-R-D, but H-E-R-D. It's how one moves sheep or cattle around. They are herded around. So you get the picture. The picture is kind of this surreal moment. Here you are trying to herd the wind. It's like going out there and going, no, whoa, wait, whoa, don't blow here, blow here. You know, that's silly, you can't do that. But that's what we try to do. It's herding the wind. You're trying to put the wind where you want it to go. You think it will fix things. It will provide all you need to know to bring peace to your heart and to your soul. It'll order your world, but it doesn't do it. This picture is often found in seeking theological wisdom as well. We have all kinds of books. We have all kinds of studies. We have numbers of confessions that churches have made that we recite. Our favorite radio preachers are on, and we think more theology will fix things for us, right? It will fill in the blanks and fill my box-driven view of God. Yet sin still exists, doesn't it? We still have to go through with church discipline. It doesn't answer the problems. We have children that leave the church by the droves. We have people that get angry at you. Wisdom, you see, is not the end for this world. It's a means to an end. Wisdom itself is not the final stop. And it wasn't his final stop. But he did conclude, it's a striving after the wind. Notice secondly, let's go to the place called pleasure. Do you see that? Chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. He says, after visiting wisdom for life and seeing the hopelessness of it, he pivots, as it were, into a different direction. And you can see this. I said in my heart, he begins to talk to himself. And it becomes first person. I'm doing this. Come now, I will test with pleasure. Let's try this. This looks fun. Studying is not so fun, and it doesn't do what it says it'll do. It doesn't pay as it advertised, so let's try this. Let's hit the town. Let's buy a ticket for some entertainment and let's laugh. I think laughter's great. Let's binge on Netflix. Let's put in front of our senses great videos and games that will take us to another reality. Let's create a metaverse where we can control our own world. And if that doesn't do it, let's feel in our bodies the intoxication of my senses by giving ourselves to wine. I mean, let's just live to ourselves, the finest of wines, and let's sit outside in the sun and savor every glass of wine. But notice verse 3. For Solomon, it wasn't unbridled frivolity. Look at verse 3 with me. Notice what he says. I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom. So he didn't lose his senses here. He didn't go berserk. He said wisdom still played a part. So this was intentional. He didn't lose his senses. There's this intentionality, and he's pursuing, is there something in the world that can truly satisfy the heart of a human being? Please, God, isn't there something that will bring this satisfaction? And there's no end to his ability to give himself to this pleasure. I mean, he tried everything while thinking that pleasure would satisfy. Notice he concluded, laughter is madness. It's madness. It's fake. Most of the people are just sitting there laughing in a fake way. The book of Proverbs tells us that laughter is good medicine, and I think it is. But we also learn in chapter 14, verse 13 of Proverbs, that even in laughter, the heart may ache. Laughter is often a clever cover used by people who are seeking to escape reality. They'll just laugh at things. And it'll be this nervous type laughter. And right next, then, to this part of town called pleasure, it bumps right into a little bit larger village called possessions. A place called possessions. And we see this in verses 4 through 11. Now, what goes unnoticed, you probably didn't notice this as we read through this. What goes unnoticed in the second chapter is that from chapter 1, verse 14, all the way through chapter 2, verse 24, the first person pronoun I is used 41 times. It really becomes clear what Solomon is doing here. This is a test of a life that is void of God and his word. He has given himself to I. And this is not unlike what happens every day in our own lives, even those who would be considered faithful believers. Much of life avoids God in all of life. We like to pretend that God exists, especially when we come to church and we meet like this. We like to pretend and we like to perform as if God exists, but in reality, I am in charge. And so now in verse 4, he fills his life with possessions and projects. Does this sound familiar? Great works, he says, were all the things that he possessed. And he names them: houses, vineyards, gardens, parks, all kinds of fruit trees, and irrigation for his yards that would cause his possessions to stand out against all others, especially in the desert climate around Jerusalem. So man, his looked really nice. And notice verse 7, he owned people. He owned flocks of all kinds of animals, and more than anyone else before him in Jerusalem. So this was quite a statement. Verse 8, he possessed great wealth, much silver and gold, treasure that he got from other kings and provinces. He owned musicians. He didn't have XM radio. He didn't have Spotify. He actually owned the musicians. And they came to work. And every day they were playing something for him, whether he listened to it or not. He had the best music, had the greatest sound systems. There were no doubt operas, there were no doubt plays, and then you couple with all that, there were all kinds of women for his pleasure. And managing all of this would have been a nightmare. But it didn't seem to faze him from this pure external view that he had. Everything is outside of his life. Could it be that this is where happiness lives? Discipline, goals, finances, building, farming, landscaping, concerts, activities after late night concerts all became ways to feed his own lust, and he gave himself to responsibility. He gave himself to prestige, to nobility, power, endless money, sex, and celebrities. He had it all. I mean, this is the stuff of secret dreams. This is true fame and fortune. And it came from every corner of the earth. And how is it all summed up? What is the end of this endless cycle of things, of pressure, management, supreme discipline of mind and body? Look with me in verse 11. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil that I expended in doing it, and behold, all was habad, hurting of the wind. There was nothing to be gained. I couldn't control one part of it. I couldn't leverage anything by it. Isn't it amazing how often we fall for this kind of thinking in our own hearts? I mean, we go from place to place looking for what will quiet this gnawing feeling in the deepest parts of our soul that goes so unsatisfied. And when someone bumps up against it, they get your wrath all over them. I mean, I love a beautiful yard. Some of you know this. I spend money on my yard. I like it to look good. It's my spring project that I do. I don't have irrigation. I had irrigation down in South, but up here, irrigation's not really a thing, kind of, at least in my neighborhood. I love studying outside. I have this neat little corner of my yard surrounded by the beauty of God's work and greenery. A lot of it is potted flowers. I just love it. I just love it. It's a beautiful place. But it doesn't take much to cause me to become dissatisfied. These things called grubs. When it's very little rain in August, with high temperature, things turn brown all of a sudden. Those hostas turn ugly. Bad soil that fails to feed the plants. I don't know. I always thought that Ohio had rich, deep black soil. Not in my neighborhood. I probably need to truck it in. So like Solomon, there's no leverage to be gained and to make my heart satisfied. And at the end of every summer, I'm going like, what good was all that work? I loved it for a while, but then it just goes away. And right now, it's all covered by the snow anyways, right? Like, why do I do that? And then finally, let's visit this place that I call a place called profundity. That's my word. It's not Solomon's word. But I want you to see where he goes next. Because starting in verse 12, probably in your Bible, it says the vanity of living wisely. He says, so I turned. And here he goes once again, and this time he goes past the elements of the physical realm, and he really dives into the workings of the mind or the heart. Words in this section like wisdom, madness, folly, light and darkness, the wise person, the foolish person. And here is he is beginning to settle on what is really true, what is really profound. And he goes to what I would call profundity, the place where truth, reason, and logic reside. It's a place that many of us want to go to. And we think we go there, but it is our own created profundity that we're after. Here, he realizes that he can't afford to go to his own place. What is true or what is profound is that his satisfaction cannot be in the physical world. It's not in physical things. So he goes to what is going on to his heart, the center of his mind, his will, and emotions. And he begins to realize that there are things in this world that are better than other things and have greater effect in your life. He says, wisdom is better than folly. Light is better than darkness. The wise see, but the fool is blind, in verse 14. And then it hits him. And it's almost like it's a ton of bricks that hits him. And he goes, there is one thing, though, that changes absolutely everything in life. There is something that happens no matter who it is, no matter how wise a person is, or how foolish a person is, how wealthy they are, how many things they have, and how many things that they do. And he says, this is profound. Look at verse 16. This is profound. For if the wise is of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. So he says, so I hated life. The wise die just like the fool. Death is a game changer. The same shaped box that carries the lifeless body to the graveyard of a wise man is the same shaped box that carries the lifeless body to the graveyard of a foolish man. Death levels the playing field for everybody. Death stalks everyone. Do what you will with your lives and do it differently, but in time we will all succumb to death. Here he takes us back to Eden, the Garden of Eden. And in Eden, God said to Adam and Eve, the day you eat of this tree, you shall surely die. Sin brings certain unavoidable death. The reality is that if death doesn't inform the way we live, then death is something we're pretending doesn't exist. We're refusing to live according to what is true. A fellow by the name of Peter Kreeft interprets for us the writings of a 17th century French mathematician and philosopher, theologian. A familiar name you've probably heard of, Blaise Pascal. And Blaise read and wrote a lot about wisdom. And he says this, if you are typically modern, your life is like a mansion with a terrifying hole right in the middle of the living room floor. So you paper over the hole with a very busy wallpaper pattern to distract yourself. You find in your home a rhinoceros in the middle of your house. The rhinoceros is wretchedness and death. How in the world can you hide a rhinoceros? Easy. Cover it with 1 million mice. Multiple diversions. You see, my friend, we give ourselves to such diversions because we do not want to face truth. This false life in the heart that we live hates. And there begins to grow in us quietly a hatred for life. Verse 17, he says, I hate it. I hate it for all my efforts because some idiot will get what I saved. In verse 18. It becomes despair because you toil and you work, but you can't enjoy it because death robs you of it, and that death then gives it to someone else who didn't use wisdom and skill. They just get it. And it led him to days full of sorrow and grief, so much so it kept him up at night. And it sucks the life right out of you. In fact, Pascal goes on to write, quote, the sole cause of man's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his room. Then he feels his nothingness, his abandonment, his insufficiency, his dependence, his impotence, his emptiness. And from the depths of his soul, there will arise boredom, melancholy, sadness, sorrow, spite, and despair. And if it stopped right there, Solomon would have made his point. But that, my friend, is not the end for the person who believes in the true God. And in verses 24 through 26, there's a small ray of light that begins to be seen. Look with me at the conclusion of this text, beginning in verse 24. He says this. It's almost like it just came out of the clear blue, but you know he's put much thought in this. He goes, there is nothing better for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. You go, wait a minute, Solomon. Wait. You just got through spending a whole 2 chapters talking about Havel, the vapor, how it's contradictory almost at what you're saying now, because life is a vapor under the sun. And now all of a sudden you hear there's nothing better for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil? Solomon, what's going on? Well, my friend, he is not some pining nihilist touting that defeated phrase that we hear, eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we die. That's not what he's saying. No, the preacher here says, eat, drink, and be merry because that's what God has given you in this life under the sun. You see, Solomon isn't bemoaning the reality of wisdom. He isn't bemoaning the reality of laughter or wealth or pools or landscape here. He is warning us to make sure they are not the things that we are pursuing in order to gain satisfaction. And this is what we do. We try to gain our own quietness of soul in anything other than in Christ. And in God, the goodness of God. You see, death has a way of bringing clarity, doesn't it? There's coming a day of death, and then comes judgment. There is a God, and you're not him. This is what he's saying. You see, death has a way of bringing this kind of clarity, and we've seen this in the past couple of years, haven't we? Death has come very close to many of us, and all of a sudden life then has a new view for us. We are limited because we're creatures, and because even more importantly, we are fallen creatures. We're not entitled people. We're people who have been given a gift by God. We even have built in us flawed assumptions about God. Flawed assumptions about others, and flawed assumptions about life's providences that God has designed for us. Our pride from within, we feel entitled. We feel cheated if we don't get what we think we deserve or what we have worked so hard for. And Solomon's whole point in this section is to show us that the world cannot be leveraged to suit me. And life is meant to be enjoyed as a gift from God, not mastered as something we're entitled to. Oh, can we please learn this as the people of God? One writer says this, realizing this can help you deal with life in a way that honors God. For example, do not be surprised to find yourself in a frustrating situation from which you cannot escape by means of controlling it. Let me read that again. Do not be surprised to find yourself in a frustrating situation from which you cannot escape by means of controlling it. Can we just put in there COVID? Not everything can be fixed. Not everything is a problem to be solved. Listen carefully. Something must be borne. Something must be suffered. Something must be endured. Wisdom does not teach us how to master the world. It does not give us techniques for programming life such that life becomes orderly and predictable for us. It's not about us. Now here's what I want you to see from, as I said earlier, chapter 1, verses 14 through 2:23. God has been entirely absent. Self was dead center. Now in verses 24 through 26, God is mentioned 3 times in quick succession. The emphasis here is on what God gives. And this is where the emphasis must be in a fallen world. Endless, eternal joy does not come in a box. It comes from God. The way God gives us enjoyment in His gifts is by giving us true perspective to ourselves. Now today, at the end of our time together, we have yet another time to observe what God through Christ has done for us and the gift of righteousness that comes to us through Jesus Christ. Men, will you come now and prepare to service what we call the Lord's table?
Thank you for joining Christa Community today as we educate, evangelize, and encourage Christ-like discipleship. Will you pray about supporting this conservative ministry as we encourage and establish missionaries, seminaries, and churches around the globe? You may donate at the link below. If the Lord has spoken to you in today's teaching and you need spiritual care, or if the Lord is calling you to partner with Christa Community individually or as a local church, please contact us. We pray today's teaching has encouraged your faith, hope, and love in Christ.